Russia continues to hit Kyiv with missiles in order to reveal the location of the Ukrainian air defense systems. Kinzhal, meaning dagger or Patriot, what was shot down over Kyiv and what was actually destroyed? European tour of Volodymyr Zelensky. Will we finally get European fighter jets? And Greece refuses to give Ukrainian armed forces weapons, and Ukrainians are forced to serve in the Estonian army. This and other fakes we will reveal together with our partners from StopFake. This is Spotlight Ukraine, trends, world politics and deep analytics made by Ukrainian journalists to the whole world. My name is Yuri Fizer and we are starting right now.
The enemy is aggressive, it advances, we hold it back, but it keeps attacking.
The most urgent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails, that President Putin does not win this war.
We are creating a coalition that trains our pilots on modern Western aircrafts.
A small-scale counteroffensive is underway. The Ukrainian army continues to liberate territory in the area of Bakhmut. Over the past few days, the AFU have managed to advance 50 square kilometers to the north and south of the city. The frontline situation and preparations for the major Ukrainian counteroffensive next in our review.
We are coming, guys. We are coming.
Залетаем, парни, залетаем!
The 3rd Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces counterattacks in the area of Bakhmut, liberating the positions captured by the occupiers. The Ukrainian army continues its offensive in this area of the front.
Over the course of several days, our troops liberated about 20 square kilometers of the Bakhmut suburbs in the north and south. At the same time, the enemy is making some progress in Bakhmut itself, destroying the city with artillery. In addition, the enemy is bringing in units of professional paratroops. Heavy fighting continues with varying results.
The occupiers have brought 4 additional battalions to this area, writes the American Institute for the Study of War. At the same time, Bakhmut has become a mousetrap for the Wagner PMC, said the commander of the Eastern Military Group, Oleksandr Syrskyi, visiting the city's defenders.
You have stumped the entire Russian army with your actions, because the Russians don't know where the offensive is, where our real offensive is, what's happening near Bakhmut, which they already considered theirs, saying that it was surrounded. The situation is completely different now, despite the fact that Wagner has entered Bakhmut like mice into mousetrap. We continue our offensive from the north and from the south.
Containment and destruction of the enemy in Bakhmut is extremely important for the future Ukrainian counteroffensive, Syrskyi reiterated. Here our military have the opportunity to hone their offensive tactics, military experts believe.
When we talk about the work of the 3rd Assault Brigade, which conducted offensive operations in areas which were defended by the enemy using new tactics and new approaches, so we can say that the actions of the Ukrainian army on the flanks, which end in successful outcomes, are the basic for testing certain methods of the warfare that can be scaled up in other parts of the front.
Preparing for our counteroffensive, the Russians are trying to reconnoiter places of military equipment accumulation all over Ukraine, the expert says. The Russian Defense Ministry said that on May 16th, a Patriot air defense system was destroyed during the attack on Kyiv. The Ukrainian armed forces have not commented on this. However, according to CNN, citing a source in the US government, the Patriot air defense system was probably only damaged. CNN also writes that Ukraine is already actively using the long-range Storm Shadow missiles it recently received from Britain. In contrast, Germany has announced the largest military aid package to Ukraine since the beginning of the Russian invasion, worth €2.7 billion.
And to talk more about this, I am joined by Ihor Kozak, military and political expert, Ottava-Washington, retired Canadian Armed Forces officer. Hello and welcome, Mr. Kozak.
Hello.
Mr. Kozak, for the first time in combat, Ukrainian air defense has shot down 6 Russian hypersonic missiles at once. We understand how important this is for Ukraine, but how important is this for the world and for the United States, namely as the country of origin of this Patriot system?
It's a major development for everybody involved here, for Ukraine, of course, for United States, for Russia as well, just for different reasons and with different consequences. Prior to this development, Russians claim, as a matter of fact, President Putin himself publicly claimed a few years ago that Kinzhal supersonic missile was unstoppable. There were no air defense system in the world that could stop it. Now, Americans were saying that potentially Patriot or other Western defense systems could stop it, but there was no proof to that matter. Now we are seeing that Russians certainly overstated their capabilities and they lost face once again on the international arena. And we are also, yes, another, stroke here to against the Russian military might myth that we've been seeing being, challenged here over the past 15 months as they're having horrible losses in Ukraine and not able to achieve any success whatsoever. And we do have a proof that Patriot's able defense system and likely other Western systems are able to detect, analyze, and stop Kinzhal supersonic missile, not only one but several at the same time. This will have a long-term consequences. No doubt Americans are taking data from Ukraine right now, analyzing and improving their systems. It's also going to make many countries around the world who are relying on the Russian technology, on Russian capabilities, Russian support, to question how effective they are, and also is going to change the whole game for other countries where, for example, hypothetically speaking, it is possible that Russia might provide Kinzhal or other such weapons to rogue states like Iran or North Korea and countries like or China, and countries like United States or other countries in the West would have to find a way to defend them. Now, it's it's not a question anymore whether it's there is ability to defend against Russian weapons. And I would say the last thing, very important, is for Ukraine, not only because Ukrainians were able to destroy 6 Kinzhal supersonic missiles and prevent much damage and, most importantly, save lives, but also Ukrainians demonstrated that they were capable of learning this very complex Patriot defense system in the US in the record time and to apply this knowledge extremely effectively on the battlefield. That tells you and tells everybody in the West that Ukrainians are able and capable of receiving, learning, implementing successfully Western weapon, modern technologies while defending Ukraine in the entire free world, and therefore they deserve to receive more sophisticated systems, much more support, and for a long time.
And we really deserve to receive more systems. Okay, on the contrary, Russia claims it hit a US-made Patriotic air defense system. Why are Russians spreading this information? What is the aim?
Well, the aim is, as always, just to disinform the world, to confuse the world. First of all, they're trying to save face because, as I said, they stated they had a weapon that no one could stop or destroy in the world. That's not the case. And secondly, they're just trying to spread lies, to disinform their own public and to confuse the international community. Obviously, it's not working because there is a proof is there in Ukraine, and everybody in the free world knows. And hopefully, that news are also spreading in Russia. I mean, this is the old Russian tactics of propaganda. Disinformation has been going on, for a very long time. But finally, the free world and hopefully people inside Russia are seeing that Putin's regime is lying, how weak it is, and then it's just creating more damage for its own economy, for its own military forces, for its own people, and there's only for so long they can rely on this propaganda.
Okay, my next question is as follows. How many more air defense systems do we need to close the Ukrainian sky? Or let me put it in another way. Is it even possible to cover the entire Ukrainian sky given the vast territory of our country?
Look, I mean, hypothetically speaking, or theoretically speaking, anything is possible here. But from the practical standpoint, one has to realize that, it doesn't matter how many air defense system Ukraine has or how many sophisticated they will be. There is also a possibility to breach these defenses. Look, for example, at the state of Israel, which probably has the most sophisticated multi-level air defense system capability in the world, and yet, their enemies in Hamas, or other terrorist groups, they are firing, and sometimes they're breaching those defense system. And so, Ukrainians need to be prepared that, yes, they need to strengthen their air defense system, but there is also a possibility it will be breached. The only way to prevent Ukraine and Europe from Russian missile attacks, from Russian threat, is for Ukrainian to win this war as quickly as possible, for Ukrainian armed forces to liberate the entire territory of Ukraine, including Crimea, and for Ukraine to join NATO, and jointly for Ukrainian forces and NATO forces to put appropriate defenses on the Ukrainian and NATO border, and to prevent the threat this way before it actually occurs.
Well, we will surely win, and we will liberate all our territories. But my next question is as follows. I understand that not long ago, the question of providing us with the fighter jets was almost a fantasy. Now we all realize that this will happen. The only question is when? When, in your opinion?
Well, it certainly will happen. I've been saying this all along, just like we had a tank coalition, and now we're having the fighter jets coalition. Those of us who've been lobbying in the West Ukrainian interest knew it would happen. Now we know it's happening. Like, I will not speculate on a specific, timelines, for a simple reason, because it's unlike in the case of even air defense system or the Leopard 2 tanks coalition or other coalitions. Aircraft, fourth generation fighter jets such as F-16, it's a very complex system. There is also so much involved in terms of the aircraft maintenance, logistics support. All I can tell you is that all of those aspects are being very actively investigated in the West. As a matter of fact, Ukrainian pilots have been in the United States since March, and they've been undergoing various type of testing to see how ready or how capable they are operating an F-16, how long is going to take. The same look at the technical personnel and logistics support and other aspects as well, and also taking into consideration how quickly Ukrainians learn to operate Leopard 2 tanks, for example, in 30 days, as opposed to a year, what it usually takes in the West, and the same with Patriot defense system, other systems. I think it's being looked at the shorter timeline. So hopefully not too long, but I cannot answer your question specifically. I think we will know this answer in the coming weeks and months.
But we will, and that's the best. Okay, when, after the successful start of our counteroffensive, can Russian commanders realize that they have lost? Can it be after they finally lose Bakhmut, or maybe later?
Well, look, I mean, I think many Russian commanders are already realizing they're losing, whereas Prigozhin speaking publicly about it, or certain other, through the other commanders amongst themselves, or reporting through their chain of command as being intercepted by the Western and Ukrainian intelligence sources. But the reality here is it doesn't matter what they realize. The only time this war is going to end is when Ukraine wins, when Ukraine reaches, liberates all of its territories, including Crimea. And as I said, when the international community brings the Putin's regime to its knees with economic sanctions, with political pressure, and with additional significant military support to Ukraine, only at that point in time, hopefully the leadership of Russia will realize they will lose. The Russian society will realize that they have lost, will realize that a criminal regime of Vladimir Putin brought collapse of the Russian economy and destroyed Russian reputation on the international arena. Hopefully they will bring down the collapse of the regime in itself, and that should bring peace to Europe and peace to Ukraine. Before that, it doesn't matter where Ukrainian, takes over Bakhmut or any other city. While it's important to liberate, every city, every village, I do not believe that the Russian commanders will publicly acknowledge defeat unless they're actually physically defeated and Putin's regime is physically brought to its knees by Ukrainian armed forces and the international community.
Oh, I see. And my last question for today. Canada has provided us with a lot of military and financial assistance. Many of our soldiers and officers were trained at Canadian military training grounds. Why is your country, which is located very far from Ukraine, helping us so actively?
It's true what you stated, that Canada has been helping Ukraine for a long time. I mean, over the past 30 years, Canada, as a matter of fact, was the first Western country that recognized independence of Ukraine and helped throughout the Orange Revolution of dignity, and since the beginning of the Russian invasion or aggression against Ukraine in 2014, and obviously is doing it now. I think the reason is probably twofold, if I may just generalize. First and foremost, Canada, where it has 38 million population, approximately 1.5 million of them are Ukrainian Canadians. Those are who officially on the census are putting their, nationality or their background as a Ukrainian Canadians. That's a significant number of the population. There is a very strong Ukrainian Canadian and active Ukrainian Canadian and diaspora. There are many Ukrainians in various walks of Canadian lives, in government, in parliament, in media, and therefore the support for Ukraine is very, very strong because of that high presence of Ukrainians throughout the Canadian society. And secondly, I think it's fairly simple. Those things that Ukrainians are fighting and dying for right now, freedom, democracy, human rights, rule of law, just simply put, a better future for their children, is something that Canadians can very well, understand. Canadians too, went to World War I, World War II, defending, freedoms and democracy. In Europe, they've been deployed in various peacekeeping missions. They try to achieve peace and bring down terrorism in Afghanistan and paid the ultimate sacrifice where many Canadian soldiers died. So Canadian society in general, Canadian parliamentarians, government, media can certainly relate, and therefore to what Ukrainians are doing and supporting for those very same reasons that we Canadians believe in.
Mr. Kozak, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you very much for answering the question about our future victory and the help and support we are getting from our allies and partners from abroad. This was Ihor Kozak, military and political expert, Ottava-Washington, retired Canadian Armed Forces officer. This is Spotlight Ukraine. More to come. Europe continues to actively help us return the temporarily occupied territories. The leaders of the EU countries overwhelmingly, unanimously reaffirm their full support for Ukraine for as long as it takes for us to win, not only in words but also in deeds. This is how we can briefly summarize the results of President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the several European countries. But more about this tour in our story.
Our priority is offensive action. This is how President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky briefly outlined the main goal of his meetings with his European counterparts. In Rome, Berlin, Paris and London, he once again asked our partners and allies to provide more weapons to launch a counteroffensive against enemy positions and liberate the temporarily occupied territories. And in London, he even announced the creation of a Ukrainian-British coalition of fighter jets to protect our skies. According to Volodymyr Zelensky, very little more is needed, both in terms of weapons and time. However, he did not disclose any details.
3 long days, and our soldiers and our country are getting stronger. I'm sure of that, much stronger. We are returning home with new defense packages, more new, more powerful weapons for the front line, more protection for our people, more political support.
The main thing is that some European leaders have demonstrated a radical change in their attitude to how to end Russia's bloody war in Ukraine. While some European heads of state immediately expressed their full support for Ukraine from the outbreak of full-scale aggression, there were others who initially preferred to talk to Putin. Fortunately, their attitude has changed dramatically. For example, here is what France promised Ukraine following Volodymyr Zelensky's meeting with Emmanuel Macron.
The military support provided by France since the beginning of the war in order to allow Ukraine to defend itself continues, as new packages are being prepared, constantly taking into account the most urgent and immediate needs of Ukraine to strengthen its defense capabilities. France is aiming at providing full capacities in all the areas. In the coming weeks, France will train and equip several battalions with tens of armored vehicles and light tanks. Besides, France is focusing its efforts in supporting Ukraine's air defense capabilities in order to defend its population against Russian strikes.
Moreover, the leadership of the European Union has also anonymously appealed to the so-called G7 countries not to expand military assistance to Ukraine, but also to speed it up.
I also expect the leaders to rally behind two main principles. The one is that we will keep supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. And the second principle is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. As long as it takes must translate basically into stable financial support, of course also beyond 2023, and accelerated military support focused on the now and here. And nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine means very strong support for President Zelensky's peace formula.
And while people in Ukraine and abroad are wondering when our counteroffensive will begin, Europe is making it clear that whenever it starts, the entire civilized world will be with us until we win.
Ukraine is here, and Ukraine is Europe. Glory to Ukraine! And to talk more about the support we are getting from our allies from the European Union, I am joined by Michał Kamiński, Vice Marshal of the Senate of Poland, former member of the European Parliament. Mr. Kamiński, hello, and thank you for joining us today.
Good evening. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava. Mr. Kamiński, the Financial Times reported today, citing sources, that September could be very critical for the continuation of military and financial assistance to Ukraine. Here is the quote from the article. If we get to September and Ukraine has not made significant gains, then the international pressure on the West to bring them to negotiations will be enormous. This is the end of quote. Obviously, we will do everything to win here in Ukraine, but we believe in our brave soldiers, defenders, but still, is this really the theme being actively discussed in the West?
I think that we have to understand that, especially today, when everyone is expecting the Ukrainian counteroffensive, there is a huge political and intelligence game in the media sphere about the counteroffensive, its time, and its possible consequences. So, to be honest, I don't believe too much of the informations which are published right now in even Western media, because there are so many games inside that I hope that many of those informations are just untrue, like this one, that if it will not be a huge success of the counteroffensive, it will be a pressure on Ukraine in September from the Western countries to what? To make a peace with Russia without gaining a full control over the Ukrainian territory. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible that West will change so soon its opinion about the war. We understand, and we fully understand, that we cannot have right now overestimated expectations about the Ukrainian counteroffensive, because we have to understand that, military speaking, Ukraine already had a huge success, because it stand very effectively for more than 1 year against the Russian invasion military. And Ukraine regained some territories, and the Russians are now in not only military but also in, let's say, moral defensive. And this is already a huge success of Ukraine. So what the West would expect more? West should understand that the force right now used against Ukraine by Russia is unfortunately in big extent financed by the same West during the past 30 years, you know, pumping the European and Western money to Russian economy, including Russian military.
Oh, I see. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Council of Europe, the summit of Council of Europe that was held in Iceland. And they, members, leaders of the states present, adopted a resolution that includes the creation of a special register of damages that Russia caused to Ukraine during the war. And compensation for losses will be paid from Russian frozen assets. How much time do you think it will take for this mechanism to become fully operational?
You know, it's a big question. I think that we should do everything possible to make it work as soon as possible. And it is, by the way, in the interest of West, because the money which will be used for reconstruction of Ukraine, this money will be used also for benefit of the Western economy. And this money is now not in the pockets of the Western taxpayers, but is in the pockets of the Russian oligarchs and the people, the friends of Putin, and the money which are frozen in the Western banks. So we should use it as soon as possible to reconstruct Ukraine, and we should also make a very specific list of all the damages which Ukraine suffered from Russia, and which Ukrainian citizen, and which actually almost every Ukrainian family suffered from the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation should be responsible for the reconstruction of Ukraine, for all the costs which will be necessary after this war, which was started by Russia, not a year ago, but in 2014.
Okay, I see. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Hungary, Serbia and Turkey did not support this resolution in Iceland. Why are there countries in the Council of Europe that still do not understand how important this is?
You know, I would separate the position of Turkey and Azerbaijan, because we all know that Turkey and Azerbaijan, which is a very strong ally of Turkey, they are trying to play, let's say, a middle role in this conflict. I would withdraw from, making any assessments of this position, because I have a great respect for both Turkey and Azerbaijan. And I also know that, for example, Azerbaijan is very active in helping Ukraine during this war. And I think that this is another story than other countries which are simply, helping Russia. And we have to name it with the bold letters. Yes, Hungary is an active ally of Russia on European territory, on European soil. And the same is for all other countries from Balkans, for example, which are voted or in favor of Russia or not joining the Western United Front against the Russian oligarchs. I cannot understand how Serbia could apply for membership in the European Union, not following the lines which is followed by most of the Europeans.
Oh,
and the same for Georgia. Yeah. And actually, I had a pleasure to speak in the name of the Polish Senate in the last meeting of Kozak in Stockholm. And I called for immediate release of Mikhail Saakashvili. This is the case of Georgia, and this is the case of the country which is actually against the will of its own people, helping Russia during the war in Ukraine. Because we all know that most of the Georgians are in favor of Ukraine. Unfortunately, this regime is against.
That's really unfortunately. All of us in Ukraine would like our country to become an European Union member as soon as possible. I understand that the war must end first, but maybe you can give us some more realistic time frames based on your own experience.
You know, I have a huge experience in the process of European integration of Ukraine. I'm an author of the first document.
That's why I asked.
about my report in the European Parliament in 2007. It was the first document in which it was said that Ukraine will be a member of European Union in the future. So I remember how hard it was in 2007, even to vote such a small amendment, but very significant. Today, it will be, I think, anyway, quite more easier to have an agreement on the membership of Ukraine in the European Union, but we should use the 5 minutes we will have. Because just after the war, after the winning in the war, we will have this 5 minutes to make as soon as possible the huge progress on the Ukrainian membership. And what is my political plan and my political plan for all the friends of Ukraine in the European Union, that we should demand a date as soon as possible, and I have this date. We should say that Ukraine will be a member of European Union in 2029. In this 10 years, in 20s, Ukraine will be a member of European Union. It is an ambitious plan. It is an ambitious plan, but I think it is possible. It is possible if it will be a political will on the European side. I remember how we fought about the date in Poland back in 90s. We wanted to have a date, and Chancellor Kohl from Germany came to Poland, and I remember I was covering it as a Polish young journalist in the Polish parliament, and I remember when he pronounced the words in Polish parliament that Poland will be a member of European Union in 2000. Okay, he was mistaken. I mean, we've been member of European Union in 2004, but anyway, we had the date. And what I would like to have right now for Ukraine is a date of membership. And then we will do everything possible to make this date possible. But this is the time in history. There are sometimes it happens. This is the time in history when the sky is the limit for our dreams. The sky is the limit for our dreams, and the people on front. Today, when we are talking to you, someone maybe is dying, and he is dying for my freedom, for your freedom, but also for the membership of Ukraine in the Western world. So we have a moral obligation. We have to fulfill our moral obligation to the people who are dying for European Union. I said in my speech in Stockholm this week that this is obviously not this first war on European soil. This is obviously not even the first war after the 1945, but this is the first war ever about the European Union. And this is a moral obligation for the European Union because the people are dying for being members of our Commonwealth. And it makes us especially obliged to help Ukraine to be member of European Union as soon as possible. Not anything could be possible. If someone is telling me that Ukraine soon in Europe, it is soon in European Union, it's not possible. I'm saying 5 years ago, you were saying that Russian full-scale aggression against Ukraine is impossible, but it was possible. So now I'm telling you the Ukrainian membership in European Union is as well possible.
And we need a date. We need a date.
Yes, we need a date. That's my plan. We need a date, a date of membership. And give us the date.
And my last question to you for today would be as follows. Is the European Union ready for a possible confrontation with Russia, given the recent downing of the Russian missile in Poland, which can be seen as a real provocation on the part of Russia?
Yeah, it was obviously, at least, it was obviously an act of aggression. Probably it was a provocation as well, this Russian rocket. But, you know, the European Union has no army. And today, the strongest European army is a Ukrainian army, and it's fighting, defending Europe on Ukrainian front of this huge war. Because the Ukrainian front is a part of the huge war between Western civilization and the Ruski Mir. And on this Ukrainian front, the people are defending Europe. So, but unfortunately, Europe as such, we don't have an army. In this regard, we are not ready as European Union to confrontation with Russia. But we have NATO, and most of the members of EU are members of NATO as well. And we have a political will, at least today, after the declarations in Paris and after the also a strong statement from the German Chancellor, and you know that Polish position is was always very, very pro-Ukrainian from the very beginning, and it will be. Today we have this opportunity to stand against Russia also politically. So we are ready for confrontation with Russia, military and politically. And we should use this moment, this opportunity to enlarge Europe and to take Ukraine on board as soon as possible, because it will make us safer.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the European Union for help and support we are getting, and thank you personally to you for your help. This was Michał Kamiński, Vice Marshal of the Senate of Poland, former member of the European Parliament. Heroyam Slava. This is Spotlight Ukraine. More to come. And it's time in Spotlight Ukraine to talk about debunking of Russian myths. And as usual, we do it with our friends and partners from StopFake. They are working 24/7 to do this and to tell all the world's truth about what is really happening in Ukraine. And now I am joined by Oleksandr Zamkovoi, fact-checker at StopFake. Oleksandr, hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start immediately from our, actually not our, but Russian first fake. Greece opposed the supply of weapons to Ukraine. This fake was created by Russian propaganda after a small rally of Kremlin sympathizers in the capital of Greece, Athens. But who are these few dozen protesters? Our journalists investigated.
Russian media spread information that mass rallies were allegedly held in Greece against the supply of weapons to Ukraine by allied states. The Tsargrad media outlet writes,
on the eve of Victory Day, residents of Athens, including our compatriots, held a rally called the Immortal Regiment. Its participants once again stated that the supply of NATO weapons to Ukrainian forces is a crime against peace and a deliberate escalation of the conflict, which could very quickly escalate into a third world war.
On May the 7th, a pro-Russian rally was indeed held in Athens, but it was by no means a massive one. According to RIA Novosti, it was attended by up to 200 people, although, judging by the photos, it was barely a few dozen. The propagandists admit that there are Russians among the participants. Behind the rally are the Kremlin-affiliated Immortal Regiment, communists and leftist parties that have no political weight in their own country. Communist Dimitrios Patelis is Vladimir Putin's personal translator who studied in Moscow.
I was lucky enough to get the best education in one of the best universities in the world, or rather the best one, Lomonosov Moscow State University.
The so-called Russian media often present Patelis' opinion as the position of official Athens, although this is an outright manipulation. The Greek government has condemned Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, supported sanctions against Russia, and participated in the supply of weapons to the Ukrainian army. On April the 6th, while meeting with the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, the Greek defense minister emphasized,
we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. That's a very clear position that we have taken from the outset.
So, Oleksandr, did I understand correctly that the main purpose of this Russian fake is to create so-called illusion that there is a serious disagreement inside the European Union and even sometimes chasms over the issue of assistance to Ukraine?
Yes, you're right. They are using all the possibilities to create the illusions. They often ask the pro-Russian organizations and some European organizations, far-right or far-left organizations, to join these rallies. But luckily, this time in Greece, there were only 20 people, as the journalists say, and most of them, they were just Russians, even not the citizens of the European Union. So this tells us that actually Russia doesn't have enough resources even to launch a pro-Russian rally in Athens, in Greece. But also they use these as these events are used in their media to show that actually there are different opinions in Europe regarding the Russia's war in Ukraine. So, Europe is struggling also, and if we wait a little bit or if we push it harder, maybe the opinion about stopping supporting Ukraine will be on top, which is of course not, because the majority of Europeans and the majority of European governments, they strongly support Ukraine. But for Russian people, this is just like, the leap of faith, or at least a piece of hope that actually some Europeans, they think differently, and maybe they will have the influence in their government.
Just to stop discussion of this fake, one more question, a quick question. You said about only 20 so-called Russian journalists that were present during the rally. Does this mean that Russian propagandists are lacking of money, or maybe imagination or power? I don't know.
I think this can be a sign that actually in Greece, in Athens, they can't really rely on the broader audience, because usually they also use anti-globalist narratives and anti-US narratives to gather more and more people. But at this time, the 7th of May, the only people they could use are those who are Russian compatriots, and they launched a rally for the Victory Day with their ancestors on the boards, on the photos. And this is a very popular thing that Russians do in their own country as well, who fought during the Second World War. And that's it. So that means actually that there is no support in Athens for a broader support for Russians, and the only public they could gather were just Russians that they prepared beforehand.
Luckily, they do not have support in Greece, but unfortunately, they still have support in some other European countries. But maybe with time passing, something will change. Okay, let's turn to our second fake for today. The head of main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine called for killing Russians like Hitler did in his time. This manipulative fake was created by Russian propagandists who took the words out of context. It's usual. Let's see what Kirill Budanov actually said.
Social media and Russian websites are widely spreading information that the head of the defense intelligence of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, Ihor, called for killing Russians.
Earlier in the interview with Yahoo News, Budanov said that the killing of Russians would continue around the world until Ukraine's complete victory. Budanov's words show what kind of attitude is being propagated there. I have heard similar statements only from Hitler and his associates, who said, "Kill a Russian."
Ukraina.ru quoted Vladimir Jabarov, first deputy head of the International Committee of the Federation Council of Russia. In fact, the words of the head of the main directorate of intelligence were taken out of context when answering a question about the possible involvement of the Ihor in the murder of the daughter of Alexander Dugin, a well-known far-right theorist in Russia.
US intelligence has attributed Dugin's killing to the Ukrainian government, although not specifically to the GUR. Asked about this allegation, Budanov said, "Don't continue with that topic. All I will comment on is we've been killing Russians and we'll be keep killing Russian everywhere on the face of this world until the complete victory of Ukraine."
And from the context of the entire interview and Kirill Budanov's previous comments, it is clear that he is not referring to Russians on a national basis, but to those who are involved in the war in Ukraine and commit war crimes against our citizens. But with this manipulation, Russian propaganda wants to show the alleged flourishing of Nazism in Ukraine.
So, Oleksandr, taking words out of context is kind of a trick of Russian propaganda, but fortunately, as for me, they do it very clumsy lately. Am I right?
Yes, what we see from the latest fakes that we debunk is that they are trying to manipulate with the words of our officials, and Kirill Budanov, the head of the intelligence service, is not the only one. For example, there was a huge fake which spread across Europe, mostly actually in France, During one of the press conferences, Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia had to be hit with the preventive measures, pointing at the sanctions, of course. But in lots of countries, internet trolls, pro-Russian internet trolls and bots in social media were spreading this message, saying that actually Zelensky was trying to convince everyone to hit the Kremlin, hit Moscow, or even to use the nuclear weapon to stop Russia. And of course, this was a manipulation. Zelensky never meant saying that. But it is what it is. They are all the time trying to at least reach some of those people who do not really check the information from another sources, or they just do not know what is Ukraine, what Ukrainian officials think, and try to scare the Europeans with these statements, and also try to show the Russians themselves that actually Ukrainian government is very Russophobic, and they will not stop until they kill all Russians at all, which is not true, of course.
And it's so good that these manipulations, I mean Russian manipulations and statements we are talking about, are debunked by you people from the StopFake. Thank you very much for your job. Okay, and now let's turn to our third fake. The Russian media and social networks are actively spreading information that Ukrainian citizens who came to Estonia are being forced to serve in the Estonian army. And if they refuse, Ukrainians allegedly face deportation. Let's see where this absurd fake came from.
Ukrainians are being forced to serve in the Estonian army. The staff of the embassy in Tallinn personally called back every Ukrainian in the country.
This fake is being replicated by the Russian media, and Russians are actively spreading it on social media. Every Ukrainian is supposedly required to serve 2 weeks of training in the Estonian army in case of hostilities, and refusal to do so threatens deportation from the country. The propagandists allegedly refer to the information from the Ukrainian embassy in Estonia. However, the embassy responded to StopFake's request for information.
The information about the so-called conscription of Ukrainians in Estonia for 2-week military training, personal calls of diplomats of the Embassy of Ukraine in the Republic of Estonia to Ukrainians in this regard, with warnings about possible return to their homeland, is not true and is another example of fake news from the aggressor country.
The fact-checkers also checked the Estonian state website kriis.ee, which contains all the information for refugees, and found no mention of compulsory military service. Russian propagandists also report that the situation is similar in Poland, but StopFake has repeatedly refuted this.
So, Oleksandr, let me understand why to create such fakes if they are so very easy to be checked and refuted.
Well, because they can be spread on 3 different audiences. First of all, Russians in Russia, when they try to convince them that there is a Ukraine lacks of soldiers and there is a huge problem with the mobilization in Ukraine and nobody wants to fight, so Ukrainian officials need to get back all the Ukrainian men from abroad to Ukraine, even with the force. Another audience is the Ukrainians who are now live abroad, the refugees, because when they do not really check on the official sources of the country they live in, sometimes they can see these propaganda narratives in social media, and this can scare them because without the checking, they can, for example, be afraid to go to the official institutions of Estonia, if we consider Estonia now, or apply to get with any contact with the Estonian officials, because they somehow will be threatened by the forced deportation to Ukraine. And also another audience are the Ukrainians in Ukraine, because they can see, for example, that there are problems, again, with the mobilization, and that our Ukrainian government try to forcibly take back all the men that left Ukraine before the large-scale invasion and during the large-scale invasion. What is interesting here is that actually, oftenly, they also provide fake documents in order to prove that actually this happened and there is an official document. Sometimes they call this a very hidden document because nobody would like to show that, but this order already exists, and be careful because the Estonian government, for example, will try to catch you and put you to the Ukrainian armed forces, if not just deport you back to Ukraine. But this time they were so lazy that they even didn't provide any fake documents, which we had to debunk. They only placed these news to their media, and they referred to the Ukrainian embassy in Estonia, which, of course, who never spread these lies, because when we wrote to the Ukrainian embassy in Estonia, they said that it never happened and this is a fake news.
I hope that Russians will be lazy every time they try to create new fakes. Unfortunately, they are creating and spreading thousands or maybe millions of fakes every day, every week. But luckily, we have you people from StopFake to debunk these fakes and to tell the world the truth about what is really happening in Ukraine. Thank you very much for your job. This was Oleksandr Zamkovoi, fact-checker at StopFake. This is Spotlight Ukraine. More to come. And that's all for today in Spotlight Ukraine. Thanks for being with us. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channels, Spotlight Ukraine and Espresso TV. My name is Yuri Fizer. See you next week.